Jack Harrison, with Shadow at his feet, was immersed in the quiet rhythm of the park, the scent of freshly cut grass mingling with the laughter of children from the soccer field. The day had worn into twilight, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. A peaceful evening, until the bikers arrived. The roar of engines shattered the serenity. A group of 5 motorcycles surged into the park, their riders dressed in leather adorned with skull motifs and flaming insignias. At their helm was Frank Crusher Malone, a towering figure with a shaved head, a wild beard, and a chain draped across his chest. His presence alone felt like an unspoken challenge. The group's arrival wasn't casual, it was invasive. They circled the park's fountain, the roar of engines making every passerby turn with apprehension. Jack observed them without moving a muscle, his hand steady on Shadow's leash. He didn't like how Malone's gaze scanned the park like a predator surveying its territory. Tyler Dawson, the boy Jack had taken a liking to, was still on the soccer field. The kid had a spark Jack admired, the kind that reminded him of soldiers who had grit but didn't yet know it. Jack glanced at the boy, oblivious to the biker's presence, and felt a pang of unease. The bikers dismounted, their boots crunching on the gravel. They began harassing an ice cream vendor, overturning his cart and laughing as cones and popsicles tumbled to the ground. Shadow growled low in his throat, sensing Jack's tension. A biker, a wiry man with tattoos creeping up his neck, noticed Jack and smirked. "Hey, old-timer," the biker sneered, strolling toward him. "You look like you've seen some action. Why don't you share a war story, huh?" Jack met the man's gaze without flinching. "Just here to watch the game," he replied evenly, patting Shadow's head to keep the dog calm. The biker leaned in closer, the smell of stale beer wafting from him. "You don't look like a soccer dad to me. What's your deal?" Malone, catching wind of the interaction, barked out a laugh and sauntered over. "Leave the vet alone, Pete," he drawled. "You don't mess with the wounded dogs. Not unless you want to put him down." The insult hung in the air. Jack, who had endured sniper fire and jungle ambushes, felt his pulse steady rather than spike. He had nothing to prove, but these men weren't just here to bark, they wanted to bite. Tyler, meanwhile, had finished practice and was walking toward Jack. He froze mid-step, realizing the bikers were converging around his mentor. "Hey, mister," Tyler called nervously, trying to mask his fear. "You ready to go?" Malone turned, his grin predatory. "What's this, your grandson? Cute kid. Shame if something happened to him." Jack stood, his frame still imposing despite his years. "You don't want to do this," he said, his voice a gravelly warning. Shadow stood too, hackles raised. Malone chuckled. "Oh, I think I do." He yanked the chain from his chest, letting it swing ominously. "It's been a slow day." Tyler's eyes widened as one of the bikers grabbed him by the arm. "Leave him alone," the boy shouted, kicking wildly. The biker laughed, lifting Tyler off the ground as if he weighed nothing. "Put him down," Jack said, his voice cold now, deadly. "And what are you going to do about it, old man?" Malone taunted. "You think you can take us all on with your war stories and your mutt?" Jack didn't answer. Instead, he unclipped Shadow's leash. The dog lunged, teeth bared, sinking into the arm of the man holding Tyler. The biker screamed, dropping the boy, who scrambled to Jack's side. Chaos erupted. Malone swung his chain at Shadow, but the dog was too quick, darting out of reach. Jack moved with surprising speed, grabbing the chain mid-swing and yanking Malone off balance. The big man stumbled, and Jack followed up with a solid punch to his jaw. The bikers swarmed. One swung a crowbar at Jack, who narrowly dodged it, grabbing a fallen branch from the ground to defend himself. Shadow continued to snap and bite, keeping 2 of the bikers at bay. Tyler, shaking but determined, picked up a soccer ball and hurled it at one of the men, hitting him square in the face. The tide began to turn. Nearby parkgoers, emboldened by Jack's resistance, started shouting and calling for help. Someone even threw a rock at the bikers, hitting one on the shoulder. The sound of sirens in the distance finally broke the bikers' resolve. Malone, nursing a swollen jaw, spat at Jack's feet before gesturing to his crew. "Let's go," he growled. "This ain't over." As the bikers roared away, Jack bent to check on Tyler. You okay, kid? Tyler nodded, tears in his eyes. You were amazing, Mr. Harrison. Like some kind of superhero. Jack managed a weary smile, patting Shadow's head. Just an old soldier who doesn't know when to quit. But as he watched the bikers disappear into the night, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that Malone's parting words were a promise, and not one he could afford to ignore. Crusher's voice carried like the low growl of a predator, a sinister undercurrent to his words. What's that old soldier doing here? He looks like someone who could be intimidated. His gang snickered, emboldened by the dominance of their leader. The pack of leather-clad men moved closer, their boots crunching on the gravel. Shadow stood, his ears pricking up, a low growl emanating from his throat. Jack remained seated, his expression unreadable, weathered by years of confrontation far worse than this. Crusher's grin widened as he locked eyes with Jack. Veterans don't mean anything nowadays, old man. Why are you sitting here like a master of life? Jack lifted his head slowly, meeting Crusher's gaze without a flicker of emotion. I'm just waiting for the kid. If you've got something to say, just say it. The bikers howled with laughter, their voices echoing through the park, drawing uneasy glances from parents and bystanders. A few onlookers hurried their children away, sensing the tension thickening in the air. But Jack didn't move. He stayed as still as a statue, his hand resting on Shadow's collar. The dog remained tense, muscles coiled like a spring. One of the bikers, a wiry man with a swastika tattoo inked crudely on his forearm, leaned in closer. You sure you're in the right neighborhood, old-timer? Don't see too many like you in a place like this. Crusher chuckled darkly. He probably thinks his medals mean something here. Newsflash, Grandpa, they don't. You ain't a hero anymore. Just a washed-up relic who doesn't know when to keep his head down. Jack's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. I fought so punks like you could walk free. Don't make me regret it. The gang jeered, the swastika-tattooed man spitting onto the ground near Jack's boots. You hear that? He thinks he's some kind of savior. You don't look like much, old man. Maybe we should test just how tough you really are. Tyler, oblivious to the unfolding scene, kicked his soccer ball toward the goal on the far end of the field. His laughter mingled with the shouts of his teammates. Jack's eyes flickered to the boy for a split second before returning to Crusher, who had stepped even closer. You got a lot of nerve talking to me like that, Crusher sneered. You think you're untouchable because you've got a dog and a death stare? Newsflash, we run this park. We run this town. And right now, you're in our way. Jack stood slowly, his movements deliberate. He was taller than he seemed sitting down, his frame still formidable despite his age. Shadow barked once, a sharp, authoritative sound that made two of the younger bikers flinch. Crusher, however, didn't back down. He stepped closer until they were nearly nose to nose. Let me guess, Crusher said with a mocking grin. You're going to give me some speech about how you fought in Nam, how you bled for this country, how you're not scared of a bunch of bikers. Save it, Grandpa. I don't care. Jack's voice was ice. I don't need you to care. Crusher's grin faltered for the briefest moment before he pushed Jack hard in the chest, causing him to stumble back. You don't get to talk tough to me, old man. As Jack regained his footing, a small crowd began to gather at a distance, their murmurs blending with the distant hum of the city. Tyler finally noticed the commotion, his young face scrunching in confusion. He jogged toward the scene, the soccer ball forgotten. Hey, leave him alone, Tyler shouted, his voice cracking slightly but filled with determination. The bikers turned to the boy, their laughter renewed. This your grandson, Grandpa? One of them mocked. Looks like he's got more guts than you. Crusher grabbed Tyler's soccer ball, tossing it between his hands. Nice kid. Shame he's got such a lousy role model. Jack's expression darkened. You don't want to do this. Crusher smirked and slammed the ball to the ground, sending it rolling into the nearby bushes. Tyler's face reddened, tears brimming in his eyes, but he didn't back down. Jack placed a calming hand on the boy's shoulder. Go back to the field, Tyler, Jack said quietly. But, go. Reluctantly, Tyler obeyed, but not without casting a glare at the bikers. As he retreated, Crusher laughed again, louder this time, like he'd won some grand victory. Looks like you've got your hands full, old man. First the kid, then the mutt. What's next? Jack's eyes flickered to Shadow. Next is me teaching you some manners. The bikers erupted into jeers, but the tension was palpable. Crusher stepped forward again, his hands clenched into fists. You think you can take me, Grandpa? I'd break you in half. Jack didn't reply. Instead, he removed his jacket, revealing forearms lined with faded scars. He rolled up his sleeves slowly, his movements unhurried. Shadow growled again, teeth bared. Back off, Jack warned one last time, his voice low and steady. Crusher laughed, but it was strained. You think you scare me? You're just an old. Jack moved before Crusher could finish, his fist connecting with the man's jaw in a swift, precise motion. The impact sent Crusher reeling, his leather jacket flapping as he stumbled backward into one of his men. The crowd gasped audibly. Crusher's gang surged forward, but Shadow lunged, his bark echoing like a gunshot. The dog's presence was enough to halt them in their tracks, their bravado faltering in the face of Jack's controlled fury and Shadow's snarling teeth. Enough, Jack barked. You've made your point. Now leave. Crusher, nursing his jaw, glared at Jack with pure venom. This ain't over, old man. Jack didn't flinch. It is if you're smart. The bikers retreated grudgingly, their motorcycles roaring to life. As they disappeared into the night, the tension in the park slowly dissipated. Tyler ran back, his face alight with admiration. That was amazing, Mr. Harrison. You scared them off. Jack looked down at the boy, his expression softening. It's not about scaring them, kid. It's about knowing when to stand your ground. Tyler nodded solemnly, but his eyes gleamed with pride. As Jack watched the boy return to the field, he allowed himself a small smile, knowing the lesson extended beyond just words. Tyler saw the tension from the soccer field and jogged closer, worry etched on his young face. The sight of his mentor, Jack, standing against a gang of men twice his size and half his age, didn't sit right with him. Mr. Harrison? Tyler called out, his voice trembling but steady enough to be heard. Jack immediately raised a hand, a firm gesture for Tyler to stop where he was. Stay back, Tyler, Jack said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that demanded obedience. Shadow's growls rumbled deeper, his sleek form taut and ready to spring. Sledge, the wiry biker with the swastika tattoo, turned toward the boy, his lips curling into a smirk. Hey, kid, he sneered. Is that your grandpa? You ought to learn how to live right before it's too late. Don't want to end up like him. Worn out, washed up, and thinking the world owes you something. The group burst into laughter, their jeers stinging like barbs in the air. Tyler's fists clenched, his face turning red with anger, but Jack's hand didn't waver. His gesture remained firm, an unspoken order. Don't move. Blaze, a stocky biker with a shaved head and an arrogant swagger, stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with malice. Maybe we should take that dog of yours, he said, his voice thick with mockery. Teach you a lesson while we're at it. What you think, old man? You up for that? The other bikers hooted in agreement, their laughter filling the park. Crusher, still nursing his bruised jaw from Jack's earlier blow, leaned against his motorcycle, watching with narrowed eyes. He wasn't laughing anymore. Jack's calm demeanor shifted as he rose from the bench, his movements deliberate and measured. For the first time, the bikers got a clear look at him, not just an old man but a soldier. His posture straightened, his shoulders squared, and his eyes burned with a cold, calculating intensity. It was the look of someone who'd faced worse and come out on the other side. The shift in Jack's presence was enough to make Blaze hesitate for a split second, but Sledge doubled down, stepping closer. What are you gonna do, Grandpa? Show us some karate moves? Maybe wave your little dog around like a weapon? Jack didn't respond immediately. Instead, he unhooked Shadow's leash and gave a low whistle. The dog's growling stopped instantly, replaced by a sharp focus as he sat obediently by Jack's side. You talk too much, Jack finally said, his voice low and steady. And you don't know who you're messing with. Sledge barked out a laugh, but there was an edge of uncertainty in it. Blaze, emboldened by the laughter, stepped forward. reaching a hand toward Shadow as if testing Jack's warning. "Nice dog," Blaze said, his grin widening. "Bet he'd look even better riding with us." Shadow exploded into motion, snapping his jaws just inches from Blaze's outstretched hand. The biker yelped and stumbled backward, falling onto the gravel. The gang's laughter died instantly, replaced by a tense, charged silence. Blaze scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and rage. "You'll pay for that, you old—" "Enough," Crusher barked, his voice cutting through the tension. He stepped forward, his gaze locked on Jack. "You're a tough guy, huh? Think you can scare us with your dog and your nom stories? Let's see how tough you really are." Crusher motioned for his men to surround Jack, their boots crunching ominously on the gravel. Tyler's heart pounded in his chest as he watched from a distance, helpless and furious. He wanted to run, to call for help, but something about Jack's unyielding calm held him in place. Jack's voice cut through the gathering storm like a knife. "You boys have a choice. Walk away now, and this ends here. Or you can find out how a real fight feels." Crusher's lip curled, and he stepped closer, his chain clinking menacingly with each step. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he spat. "You're just an old man who doesn't know when to quit." Jack didn't flinch. His hands were at his sides, relaxed but ready. "Last chance," he said evenly. "Walk away." Crusher lunged, swinging the heavy chain in a wide arc aimed at Jack's head. But Jack was faster. He sidestepped the attack with precision, grabbing Crusher's wrist and twisting it sharply. The chain clattered to the ground as Crusher let out a grunt of pain. In the same motion, Jack swept Crusher's legs out from under him, sending him crashing onto his back. Shadow barked once, a sharp, commanding sound that froze the other bikers in place. For a moment, none of them moved, their bravado replaced by the stark realization that they were outmatched. Crusher groaned, struggling to sit up, but Jack was already standing over him, his boot pressing lightly against the man's chest. "You don't look so tough now," Jack said, his voice cold and unyielding. Sledge and Blaze exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence eroding by the second. One of the younger bikers muttered, "Let's get out of here." But Blaze grabbed his arm, his pride refusing to let him back down. Crusher coughed, glaring up at Jack. "You think you've won? This ain't over." Jack leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. "It is for tonight. And if I see you or your boys near this park again, we'll finish this." He stepped back, letting Crusher scramble to his feet. The gang hesitated for a moment before retreating, their motorcycles roaring to life. As they sped away, the tension in the air finally began to dissipate. Tyler ran to Jack, his face a mixture of awe and concern. "Mr. Harrison, are you okay?" Jack knelt to clip the leash back onto Shadow's collar, his expression softening. "I'm fine, Tyler. Just had to remind some people of their manners." Tyler looked up at Jack, his admiration evident. "You're like a real-life action hero." Jack chuckled, patting the boy on the shoulder. "No heroes here, kid. Just a guy who doesn't like bullies." As they walked back to the soccer field together, Shadow trotting at their side, Jack glanced at Tyler and said, "Now, let's see if you can score that winning goal." Crusher, seething from his earlier humiliation, stepped forward again, his eyes fixed on Shadow. "Stupid mutt," he spat, his hand darting out to grab the dog's collar. "It was a mistake." Jack moved like a coiled spring, his fist flashing out to deliver a sharp, calculated punch to Crusher's arm. The biker recoiled instantly, clutching his bicep with a growl of pain, the force of the strike forcing him to stumble backward. "Hands off the dog," Jack said coldly, his voice carrying an edge that could cut steel. Sledge, fueled by adrenaline and desperate to restore their dominance, lunged at Jack with a wild swing. Jack sidestepped smoothly, his combat instincts honed by years of training and survival kicking in. Using Sledge's momentum against him, Jack hooked an arm under the biker's outstretched limb, pivoted on his heel, and executed a perfect judo throw. Sledge hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs with a guttural gasp. Shadow barked sharply, his growl a menacing rumble that seemed to echo through the park. The dog stood shoulder to shoulder with Jack, his body language a clear warning. "Stay back." The combination of Jack's skill and the dog's fierce presence sent a ripple of unease through the remaining bikers. Blaze, his bravado crumbling under the mounting evidence that they were outmatched, took a hesitant step back. His eyes darted nervously between Jack, Shadow, and his fallen comrades. "Screw this," he muttered under his breath, turning on his heel and bolting toward his motorcycle. But Jack wasn't about to let him escape. He surged forward, intercepting Blaze with startling speed. Grabbing the back of the biker's leather jacket, Jack yanked him off balance and spun him around. Blaze stumbled, his eyes wide with panic, as Jack's firm grip kept him rooted in place. "Not so fast, son," Jack said, his voice calm but laced with an unshakable authority. "You don't get a run after what you just tried to pull. You decided to attack someone who knows how to defend himself. Now, you're going to face the consequences," Blaze stammered, his earlier arrogance replaced by a pleading tone. "I didn't mean anything by it, man. It was just a joke. We didn't think." "That's your problem," Jack interrupted, his grip tightening just enough to make Blaze wince. "You didn't think. You saw an old man sitting in the park and figured he'd be an easy target. But let me tell you something. Men like me don't scare easy." Crusher, still nursing his arm, staggered to his feet. "You think you're tough?" he snarled, though there was a tremor in his voice. "You're just a washed-up has-been." Jack turned to him, releasing Blaze with a shove that sent him sprawling onto the grass. "A washed-up has-been just put 3 of you on the ground," Jack said evenly. "What does that make you?" The crowd that had gathered at a distance watched in stunned silence, their unease giving way to something closer to awe. Tyler, standing on the edge of the scene, clenched his fists, his expression a mix of admiration and determination. Crusher glanced at his fallen comrades and then at Jack, his confidence eroding with each passing second. "You think this is over?" he spat, his bravado a last-ditch effort to save face. Jack took a step forward, his presence towering despite the difference in age. "Oh, it's over," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "You're going to take your boys, get on your bikes, and ride out of here. And if I ever see you in this park again, you're going to wish you hadn't." Shadow barked again, the sound sharp and commanding. Crusher flinched, his eyes flickering nervously toward the dog. Blaze scrambled to his feet, dragging Sledge up with him, their earlier bravado shattered. "Come on, man," Blaze muttered to Crusher, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let's get out of here." Crusher hesitated, his pride warring with his survival instincts. Finally, he spat on the ground and muttered, "This ain't over, old man." Jack didn't respond. He simply held Crusher's gaze, unflinching and unwavering, until the biker finally turned and stalked toward his motorcycle. One by one, the gang mounted their bikes, the roar of their engines breaking the tense silence. They rode off in a cloud of dust, their departure marked by the sound of their retreating laughter, forced and hollow. As the bikers disappeared into the distance, Tyler ran up to Jack, his face alight with a mixture of relief and awe. "Mr. Harrison, that was amazing," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "You took them down like it was nothing." Jack looked down at the boy, his expression softening. "It's never nothing, Tyler," he said quietly. "Violence is a last resort. But when you're left with no choice, you stand your ground." Tyler nodded, absorbing the weight of Jack's words. "You're a real hero," he said after a moment, his admiration shining through. Jack smiled faintly, reaching down to scratch Shadow behind the ears. "No heroes here, kid," he said. "Just a man looking out for what's right." The onlookers began to disperse, their murmurs fading into the background as the park returned to its usual calm. Jack watched Tyler return to the soccer field, his steps lighter now that the danger had passed. As Shadow sat obediently at his side, Jack allowed himself a moment to breathe. The fight was over, but the lesson lingered. Some battles were about more than fists. They were about standing up for dignity, respect, and the simple right to sit on a park bench without fear. And for Jack Harrison, that was a fight worth winning. The scuffle was impossible to ignore. As the tension hung in the air, people on the soccer field began to glance over. Parents murmured among themselves, their eyes flicking nervously between their children and the commotion by the park benches. A few bolder ones started walking closer, their steps cautious but determined. "What's going on over there?" a father in a baseball cap asked as he approached, his protective instincts kicking in. Another mother, holding her toddler's hand, gasped when she saw the scene. "Is that man fighting with bikers?" she whispered. Closer to the benches, one of the spectators, a younger man in a hoodie, had already pulled out his phone. The red recording dot gleamed as he zoomed in on Jack, who stood firm with Shadow by his side, the dog's growls punctuating the tense standoff. "Yo, this old dude's holding his own like a total pro," the man said into his phone, his voice a mix of disbelief and admiration. "He just dropped 2 of them, and the rest looked scared." The onlookers' murmurs grew louder, their concern giving way to curiosity and awe as they realized the so-called old man wasn't the one in danger. He was the danger. Crusher, still clutching his arm where Jack had struck him, glanced nervously at the growing crowd. His gang's aura of menace was rapidly dissolving under the weight of public scrutiny. Blaze and Sledge exchanged uneasy looks, clearly rattled by the unexpected turn of events. A few parents pulled out their phones to film or call for help, their presence creating a wall of witnesses that pinned the bikers in place. Jack stood his ground, his expression calm but watchful, as if daring them to try something else. Shadow's steady growl was the only sound between them. Crusher's bravado cracked further as he noticed the phone cameras pointed at him. His jaw tightened, his frustration bubbling over into anger. "You've made a big mistake, Grandpa," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "This isn't over. We'll be back." Jack met Crusher's glare with a calm, unwavering gaze. "You already lost," he said, his tone even and resolute. "And if you're stupid enough to come back, you'll lose again." The words cut deeper than any punch. Crusher flinched, his pride visibly stung. He looked around at the crowd, now forming a loose semicircle, their judgmental stares adding to his humiliation. A mother spoke up, her voice sharp and cutting through the tension like a blade. "Get out of here before the police show up," she said. "You've already embarrassed yourselves enough." Another parent nodded. "You picked a fight with the wrong man. Just go." Crusher turned to Blaze and Sledge, his expression dark. "We're leaving," he growled. "Now." Blaze hesitated, still looking toward Jack with lingering resentment. "But," I said now, Crusher snapped, his voice laced with barely contained fury. The gang retreated reluctantly, their movements stiff and awkward under the eyes of the crowd. As they mounted their motorcycles, one of the younger bikers cursed under his breath, his face flushed with shame. The roar of their engines filled the air as they sped off, leaving a trail of dust and defeated bravado in their wake. The moment they were gone, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the onlookers. Parents exchanged nervous smiles, and some clapped Jack on the shoulder as they passed by. "You handled that like a champ," the man in the hoodie said, still recording. "Seriously, dude, you've got moves. What's your story anyway?" Jack shook his head, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Just an old soldier trying to mind his business." The man laughed. "Well, you're a legend now. This is going viral for sure." He held up his phone as if to show Jack the video, but Jack waved him off. "Do what you want," Jack said, glancing at the soccer field where Tyler was standing with wide eyes. "But keep me out of it." The man shrugged, tucking his phone into his pocket as he wandered off. Jack turned to Tyler, who ran up to him, his face flushed with excitement and worry. "Mr. Harrison, are you okay?" the boy asked breathlessly. "They didn't hurt you, did they?" Jack knelt to clip Shadow's leash back on, his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm fine, Tyler," he said, his voice steady. "Just had to teach them a lesson about respect." Tyler's eyes shone with admiration. "That was amazing. You were like a superhero out there." Jack smiled faintly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Superheroes are in the movies, kid. Out here, it's just about knowing when to stand up for yourself." One of the mothers approached hesitantly, her young daughter clutching her leg. "Sir, thank you for stepping up," she said. "I don't know what those men wanted, but it could have gone much worse if you hadn't been here." Jack nodded, his gaze distant. "Bullies are the same no matter where you find them," he said simply. It's best to stop them before they get too comfortable. The woman nodded, her expression thoughtful, and led her daughter back to the field. The crowd began to disperse, their conversations a mix of praise for Jack and disdain for the bikers. Shadow sat at Jack's feet, his tail wagging gently now that the danger had passed. Tyler glanced up at Jack as they started walking back to the soccer field. "Do you think they'll come back?" he asked, his voice tinged with worry. Jack didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the park, taking in the shadows and the fading light of the setting sun. "Maybe," he said at last. "But if they do, we'll be ready." Shadow let out a low bark, as if in agreement, and Tyler smiled. Whatever fear he'd felt earlier was now replaced by a quiet confidence. As they reached the edge of the field, Jack gave the boy a pat on the back. "Now, go win that game," Jack said with a rare smile. Tyler grinned and ran off to join his team, leaving Jack and Shadow to watch from the sidelines. The fight was over, but the memory of it lingered in the air, a reminder that strength came in many forms, and that even in the face of humiliation and danger, dignity was always worth defending.